Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counselors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counselors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 338 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and I'm delighted to welcome back a returning guest to the podcast today, Ruth Hill. Ruth brings a unique blend of expertise, holding a degree in sports science and sports psychology, an advanced diploma in CBT and REBT therapies, as well as having an advanced diploma in personal training and a certificate in mind and body healing. In this conversation, Ruth will share key insights from her recent lecture, REBT on pain management and exercise, which she created for the Counsellor CPD Library. We're going to explore how REBT principles can support clients dealing with pain, the role of exercise in that process, and how counsellors can integrate these ideas into their work. So stay tuned. This is a rich and practical discussion you won't want to miss. And with that said, roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome from Rory Oakes and myself, Ken Kelly, to episode 338 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, starting off with ethical sustainable practice, where today an important topic. We're going to be talking about working with suicidal clients. We then move on to practice matters. As Rory has beautifully introduced, he spoke with Ruth Hill, and the lecture is on REBT and pain management and exercise. We then go into student services, recognizing you, your students, on your formal journey to become counselors and psychotherapists, or just to learn the skills to apply in other areas of your life. And today we're going to be speaking about receiving and using counselling skills feedback. So let's start off with a heavy topic, Rory. It comes up from time to time. I think it's timiest that we should be speaking about it right now because it does align with the important dates, I guess, on the calendar when this is going out. But we're speaking about working with suicidal clients.
Yes, and we both realise, I think, Ken, that this is a delicate issue. There may be people listening who've, lost people to suicide, but it is a conversation that has to be had because it's something that therapists encounter, a lot in my experience. It happens a lot. And talking about those important dates, this broadcast will go out on the 10th of May 2025, and beginning the 12th of May 2025, it's Mental Health Awareness Week. So I think it's a timely topic to discuss, and I think it's one that, if I'm honest, it's one of the great fears that therapists have when somebody sits in front of them and says, I think I want to take my own life. I don't think that I'm useful to anybody anymore, and I just don't see a future. And how do we respond to that? How does a therapist respond to that? Well, I think preparation and understanding how to respond, doing some work before you actually get to the point where someone says they're thinking of taking their own life, is absolutely essential, because you have something that you can run through in your head. And I think that if we understand suicidal ideation, it's sort of ending one's life, and it can range from fleeting considerations to detailed planning. And many individuals may have suicidal thoughts, but without acting on them. But here's the thing, Ken. All expressions of suicidality, which I think is a word, should be taken seriously.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Rory. This is very real. Sadly, I experienced a loss of a client during my time in practice. It wasn't while I was working with them, but it impacted me deeply. They took their own life. It's very real. And every time I hear on the news or read in the paper of someone who takes their life, I think to myself, there's someone who was not heard, somebody who potentially reached out, potentially spoke out to somebody and was not seen, who might have been overlooked. And we as counselors, psychotherapists, we're in the position where people may mention, may reach out, may speak up when working with us. And it's just it's a ethical and moral imperative, Rory, I think, to understand this topic, so that if we find ourselves in that situation, we already have an action plan. We already have a way of working, rather than a knee-jerk reaction and a "what do I do now?" We want to be in a situation, if a client should mention that they are considering taking their own life or feeling really worthless and can see no way out, world would be better off without me, those kind of words, that we're able to hold that person, not knee-jerk and cause panic and call in a whole lot of other people unless it is required. And it's about knowing the steps, knowing what to look out for, knowing what to listen for, and knowing how to hold a client if we should find ourselves in that situation. And the topic we're discussing today, we cover in a number of lectures in the Counsellor CPD library. And I know today, Rory, you've particularly taken the handout and the notes from Emma Chapman's lecture on working with suicidal clients. That's the name of the lecture. But we do have a number of them in the CPD library if you are a member, and it's a very recommended topic. So often hear people saying, what CPD should I do first? These are foundational CPDs that we should be doing to kind of inform ourselves. So definition, suicidal ideation. So I'm using the words that are in the document that I'm referencing here. Encompasses thoughts of ending one's life, ranging from fleeting considerations to detailed planning. So there is an arc there that we need to understand. And prevalence, many individuals may experience suicidal thoughts without acting on them. So there's that side of it as well. But all expressions should be taken seriously, Rory.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a bit of a urban myth that does the rounds, that people who talk about taking their own lives are the last people to do it. And actually, that's not true at all. Any professional, be they a therapist or a medical professional, should understand that if someone expresses that they may think of ending their lives, it should be taken seriously. And I like what you say, Ken, about leaning in to the relationship, leaning in terms of exploring with the client what this means for them. I think that it could be quite easy to practice defensive psychotherapy and kind of withdraw from asking questions or being curious, because the therapists themselves may be fearful of getting it wrong or making it worse, and the conversation could lead to the client taking their own life. The fact of the matter is that if someone is determined to take their own life, or is thinking about it, what you say, what you inquire, isn't going to kind of push them over the edge, if you like. So we should lean into it. We should ask, and also I think we should consider the risk elements. So when we think about people taking their own lives, there are clear risk elements that that kind of push the needle to a more dangerous position, if you like. So mental health conditions, things like depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, that can increase suicide risk, as can substance abuse or drug abuse. So, one of the things I read recently is that a majority of people who take their own lives are usually under the influence of either alcohol or drugs, which I suppose isn't unusual, because maybe, they need to draw on that, sort of chemical courage to act out what they want to do. And also having a previous attempt, so a history of suicide attempts, it really does elevate risk. So if someone's tried to take their own life before, they've really crossed the boundary, and that really does elevate risk. So those are kind of things to think about. And also significant life events such as relationship breakdowns, financial hardship, bereavement and loss can contribute to it. So I think just having those things in mind, and as you said, Ken, having some sort of a plan. With that information, you can make a sort of assessment in your mind about what the risk is. Is it likely to be low, or is it likely to be high? And that would probably, it would inform you of what your next steps may be.
Yes. And everything that you've mentioned there, Rory, we're covering anyway when we're doing the initial assessment with a client. We're asking, do you have any mental health disorders that you're engaging with now or have previously? These are standard questions. And what they do is they kind of, when we do that risk analysis before therapy, it's there for a reason, So if we know what the high risk indicators are, and these high risk indicators come because of the research that is done. So this is not just kind of thinking, oh, you know what, it's probably more likely in certain conditions. The research clearly shows. And one that I think I'd like to add to that list is neurodivergence.
Yes.
Specifically autism. There is a higher risk of someone who says that they are going to end their life if they are neurodivergent. That the risk is higher, the chances are higher, significantly higher. Actually, I can't remember the actual data, but it's significantly higher. So knowing those risk factors, and they are on the handout that we're going to be sharing with you. And then, of course, so if we've identified risk factors, that wouldn't necessarily be a knee-jerk reaction. So if we're working with a client who has a history of substance abuse or is currently abusing substances, it doesn't immediately indicate that we should be looking out that they're okay. It's just that if they should give us the clues, and what we're going to do now is look at the warning signs. When we see the warning sign and we add the warning sign plus the risk factor, it gives us an indication. And warning signs, verbal clues, statements expressing hopelessness, worthlessness, or a desire to die. And in some cases, the client may just say it as it is. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to face these days anymore. I just want to end it all. They can be as blatant as that, but it can also be more veiled. I'm not worth anything to anybody. I just feel hopeless. I don't think there's a way out of this, might be an indicator. So it's, again, looking at the arc of that and understanding and watching out for those warning signs. Behavioral changes, withdrawal from social activities, giving away possessions, sudden mood improvements after depression. Now, that was an interesting one for me, Rory, within the document. A sudden mood improvement. And you might think, hold on a second, that doesn't make sense. Why would a sudden mood improvement be an indicator? And it may be, and this is my thoughts on this, it may be that person is going, I don't know how to deal with this. I can't deal with this anymore. This is too heavy for me. You know what? I think I'm going to end my life. Actually, yes, that's what I'm going to do. And suddenly it's almost like a releasing of all that burden of having to carry it, because now I've got a solution, a sad solution. And then physical symptoms, changes in sleep patterns, appetite, or personal hygiene. We may notice that. Client may speak about that. And we can add those kind of warning signs to the risk factors that we kind of cover in assessment. And of course, there's assessment strategies that we're going to look at now. Rory, I'll hand over to you for the assessment strategies of how we might delve a little deeper when we kind of maybe see a warning sign and we are aware that there may be a risk factor, how we delve deeper. And I just want to say here as well, if there is a warning sign without a risk factor, we still delve deeper. It doesn't mean that if they don't have a risk factor, we go, well, you know what, we'll just pass that over. We're going to delve deeper anyway, but it just exasperates it. Is that the right word? Don't know if it is. Don't write in if it's the wrong word. It makes it more intense or raises the risk. There you go, if the two come together. So assessment strategies, Rory.
Yes, and just to tag on to warning signs, many years ago, I interviewed Ewan Gallivan, who was a doctorate therapist who'd studied suicidal ideation in great depth. And one of the things he said was that it's more prevalent, there's more suicides in the spring than any other time of year. Now, I don't know if that evidence still stands up, but last time I looked a few years ago, it would still indicate it. And the reason was that the spring makes people feel better about themselves. The warmer days, the sun comes out, and it can be a motivator, linking into sudden mood improvement to act on the beliefs that someone has that they may be better off not being around. So that's an interesting one. Spring is there are more suicides in the spring, certainly in the UK. I'm talking about the UK here. But when we come to assessment strategies, I think the best course of action is just ask direct inquiry, ask open and non-judgmental questions about suicidal thoughts, plans, and means. And by doing that, if someone says to you, I just want to end it all, and you say to them, okay, I hear what you say. Do you have any plan to do this? And they say, well, not really. I'm just having a bit of a bad day. The risk does lower a little bit. But if they say, well, yes, I'm going to, and then they give you a detailed plan of how to do it, that does put the risk up considerably. And obviously, and also evaluate intent and means, determine how the immediacy and the specificity, if that's a word, of any plans, and whether the client has access to means. So means could be things like drugs, prescribed drugs or street drugs. That could be something, been hoarding paracetamol. And we know that statistically men have more violent deaths than women. So, if I think that's very useful information to have. Sadly, men do have more. I'm going to say more violent deaths. I'm talking about things like jumping off bridges or jumping in front of things, and where women tend to not go down as a violent route. So that's something to think about, and also evaluate intent and means. So I think determine the immediacy of any plans and whether the client has means. And what I mean by that is, in your conversation with the client, if the client says, I just don't think I'm going to be back for the next session, or I don't think I'm going to make it to the end of the week, that means that, there's an immediate, clear and present danger. And if they have access to the means to do it, or I've told you the mechanisms of doing it, you're really in a time limited situation. You really have to think on your feet. But the hopeful thing in this is that by speaking about it, they're telling someone about it. All behaviour is goal directed, as Carl Rogers reminds us. And I always think that when someone's talking about taking their own life, there's hope. There really, really is hope, because that means that they're reaching out. And, I'm not saying that therapists should follow clients around and make sure they don't do any harm to themselves, but it does really open up the opportunity for a dialogue, for you to explore with the client, and maybe just being heard is enough for them to put it on hold. Now you can use assessment tools. There's things like the Beck scale for suicidal ideation and ICD-9, I think it is. But that comes with a caveat. If you use any assessment tool, and you talked about this in the top of the podcast, and someone has low suicidal ideation, when you do a standardized assessment, doesn't mean that that's it. It doesn't mean it's written in stone. It means that it's a constant alertness to it. And you couldn't justify saying, well, the client, when I did the instrument, the scale for suicide, it was low. If it comes up in a conversation, you should engage with it, and also, you should engage with it. And I think that, to be honest, it's the scariest thing that a therapist can engage in, really, because
yes,
I think a lot of therapists might think that the client's behaviour, the client's decisions are on them, and they're not. They're absolutely not. Client makes decisions based on their own life. You can only be there to help them, and depending on the contract, intervene.
Yeah,
and
very
that's
much
maybe
so.
something what to talk about.
Yeah, we have a responsibility to our clients, not for our clients. Their responsibility for their life is theirs. And you covered direct inquiry, evaluation, intent and means, and use of assessment tools there. And for me, the most effective of those is that you ask the direct, that you're open and able to have the conversation. We've mentioned so many times on this podcast, client can only go as far as the therapist can go. If we've got a blockage or an area that we don't feel comfortable going down, then we can't be there with the client down that road. So being okay to have the discussion, being okay to say, what does that mean for you? You say, I don't think I want to be around anymore. Tell me more about what is that, and really going into that and being okay, non-judgmental, kind and warm down that road with that person, and evaluating intent and means, as you've said. If the person says, I've got the sleeping tablets next to the bed on the way home today, I'm going to drop off at the liquor store and go and buy a bottle of alcohol, and I'm going to take all the tablets and drink all the alcohol. They're giving you a very detailed plan of what they intend to do. That's going to be a great indicator right there. And another great indicator, and this is something that's in the news quite a lot at the moment, is hanging out in forums or in places that kind of speak about ways of taking your own life. There's stuff in the news at the moment around that, and what that means, and young people interacting in those kind of groups. That is a high risk factor. If somebody was to say, they've been looking and they might do it this way or they might do it that way, it's going to indicate that risk immensely. And I guess it then brings us on to the intervention technique. So if we feel that there is a high risk, what we do, and I think that the first thing that we do when we recognize there may be a high risk, this person is really actively talking about this, is that we would, first of all, I guess, just circle back to the contract that we shared with that client right at the beginning of our therapy. And it's so interesting, isn't it, that so many of the CPD topics and the topics in practice that we discuss, Rory, relate back to that initial contract that we have. It's such an important document.
Yeah.
And within your contract document, you're going to mention that confidentiality, that you would need to break that in the event that a person was thinking of harming themselves or another person. So you might retouch on that just gently, before going into the intervention techniques, because if you do have to refer that client or hold that client while another service gets involved, you don't want them to feel like you have betrayed them, that they were coming to therapy to share all this information and they thought nobody was going to hear about it. Even though you covered it in the first session, just revisit your contract and say, thinking back, remember the contract that we agreed on where we mentioned harm to self and harm to others, and that there are times where I may need to share information with other individuals. But into intervention techniques, safety planning, and the safety planning can be around the client, because when somebody is talking about this topic, it doesn't mean that they are definitely gonna do it. Like you said, Rory, you may say, well, what does that look like? And they say, well, you know what, I'm not going to do anything. But that's just how it feels at the moment. You can still go into safety planning, going, well, how might we work if you at 3:00 in the morning and this is really heavy and it's really with you, what can we put in place, and work with that person collaboratively to develop a plan that will include some coping strategies. You could help them with emergency contact details, that if they felt at the end of their tether, somebody that they might be able to reach out to. And that wouldn't be you, because we're not a blue light service as a counsellor. You can't have a counselor, you can't have a client calling you at 3:00 in the morning, but you can give them a number, maybe the Samaritans or another number, depending on where you are in the world, that person can reach out to. And then enhance protective factors, strengthening the client's support network, coping mechanisms. What are they like doing? What recharges them? Who have they got around them? Who can they speak to? Who can they rely on? Does anybody know about this? Who can hold them? Is there anybody they do feel safe with? Is there anybody that they do feel an affinity with? You can explore that. And then, of course, there are times where we just have to refer. There are times when we need to refer, where necessary, we need to refer to a different service. And certainly when I was in practice, my immediate referral pathway was through to the GP or the general practitioner, the doctor of the client. So it was one of the questions that I would ask in the intake is, who is your doctor? And that was done collaboration with my supervisor, because I'm very glad to say, Rory, I had a wonderful supervisor who, in one of the supervision sessions, said, what would you do if a client went down this road? What would be your first point of call? Would you phone the police? Would you phone the ambulance service? Who would you phone? And certainly at that time within my practice, phoning the GP was the first response, and it was in my contract that if I needed to break confidentiality around suicide, it would be to the GP, because then the duty of care has been handed over, and they of course have connections into a whole raft of professionals that can help that person. But it is tricky, the intervention techniques, because we don't want to be overly heavy-handed, and this kind of started this saying, you don't want to have a knee jerk if somebody should bring this topic up, because it does come up from time to time. I can look back on my own life, and there's times when I've gone, I just don't want to go on anymore. This is just no fun anymore. Yeah. I'd be better off not being around. I can recognize it within myself. It is a stage we all go through, and what we don't want to be doing is knee jerking, but we also don't want to be closing our eyes and ears and looking away, Rory. So, yeah,
absolutely, Ken. And I think use of supervision is absolutely essential. And I think as you mature in practice, I can remember many years ago a client who was making a decision whether to live or die. And one of the things we did when we did the mapping was she would put a picture of a loved one next to the pill she was thinking of using. And every week we'd come back to that picture and what it meant to her and what she'd be leaving behind. And it was intense work. It was very, very intense work for both myself and the client. And I'm pleased to say that her life, had a turnaround, and she went away and was still in the world. And I also think that understanding the demographic of age-specific suicide rates is useful. So in England and Wales, it's males aged 45 to 49 that are at the highest risk, and women aged 50 to 54. So again, just having that in the back of your mind. And, I think the other thing is that unlike other professions, I've often talked about going to my lovely dentist, and they're more kind of functional and relational. And that's fair enough, they're there to look after my teeth, not to hear my problems, But one of the things that I've always believed is that, you are the therapeutic tool. If you can show the client through unconditional positive regard and the relationship that they are important, that they are someone in the world, it may go a long way. I'm not saying it's going to be the magic bullet or the cure, but it may go a long, long way to helping them realise that actually they're not useless, that they are valuable people in the world, and that they're maybe just going through a time of their life where, things are difficult. But if you're by their side, it can make the difference in a life, literally in a life. Ken.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So true. That holding non-judgmental space, unconditional positive regard is incredibly powerful. And we're speaking here about intervention techniques. I think it's one of the most effective intervention techniques is the fact that they came to you in the first place. They're in front of you. They've come to a helper in this area. The fact that they're there in your room or with you online. So therein lies the hope. And an intervention technique is contracting around that and saying, well, if I see you next week, we can continue, and I can continue to help you through this. And there's another week, and we've contracted for another week. But if you're not here, there is no help if you don't keep coming here. But I'm here to help you and to hold you. I think that is so. It's important. The fact that they're there in front of you is the greatest sign that there is hope for that person. And I guess it brings us on to ethical and legal considerations. We have confidentiality within counselling and psychotherapy. It's the cornerstone. It's what we build the practice on, really, because it offers a space where people can come and share how it really is for them. And there are limits to that confidentiality. We must be covering that in our contracting and making the client aware of that right from the beginning, so that there isn't a feeling of betrayal. I can think of nothing worse than somebody getting to the point where they're thinking of ending their own life. They speak about it and then they feel betrayed again. So we need to hold carefully, but break confidentiality when we are required to by law. Documentation to protect you as the counsellor, but also to describe how it is for the client. If a client is having these conversations, you're seeing these signs and discussing this with a client, make sure you're making detailed notes. I've already mentioned going to supervision, Rory, and how important that is, but make sure that you are making detailed notes of exactly what that client said and how, and what the intervention was and how you were working with that person. So if I was working with a client and they said, I'll see you next week, then I would even be putting that in my notes. The client agreed to see me next week, because that indicates that there is a futuristic looking. So when someone's thinking of ending their life, often they don't see a future. So if they're committing to a future appointment, that is a good sign to put it in your notes. And then duty of care. And this is, you need to look in wherever you're listening to this, if you're in the UK, outside of the UK, be aware of the legal obligations to protect your clients from harm where you are, and what the how it works with confidentiality and breaching that confidentiality within your contract. So we need to understand and know that. And then, of course, Rory, self-care for counsellors. How can you prepare yourself, and how can you exercise self-care through a difficult challenge like that? And the first one already mentioned, Rory, it's supervision. Every single time, we say it often, speak to your supervisor. If I came out of a heavy session with a client like that, I would be phoning my supervisor in between our supervision sessions and saying, can I speak to you? This is what's going on. And training. I cannot overemphasize this. Training. Do the CPD so that you are informed, so that you are there and prepared and able to support and help and hold, that you would have all the referral services, the emergency services or numbers that you can hand over to a client when they find themselves in that situation, and have the knowledge to protect yourself by doing correct note taking, protect your practice by doing the right kind of things and evidencing the decisions that you're making and the ways that you are working with that client. It's a heavy topic, Rory, but it could not be more important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it does call for a lot of self-care for therapists, and also to remind us that suicide isn't illegal in the UK. That's why we don't use the term committing suicide, because it used to be a criminal offence. I think it went off the statute books in 1963, if my memory serves me. So it is the client's. I don't know. It's something that the client has to make a decision on themselves. But I think that if someone comes and talks to you, maybe they're asking for help. Maybe they're asking for an intervention that they can't ask themselves. But I am reminded of a therapist I met many years ago who was working with someone with a life-ending condition, and a very difficult and painful life-ending condition. And the therapy was really about when this person decided to end it. And the therapist took the view that, given the situation of the client, that this was really up to them. They were talking about assisting themselves to die. So it's not always cut and dried. It is cut and dried if you're working in children's services. If you're working with children, then you should really understand what the protocol is to break confidentiality, and that should be in your contract. You need to work with the pastoral team on that. And one final lesson that I think is useful to think about: if somebody comes to your practice and says, I've got a pile of pills in my pocket, and I'm thinking of taking them. One of the questions that may be useful to ask is, have you actually taken any of them? Because I've known of a situation where someone went to see a therapist and the person said, I've got a lot of pills in my pocket. And the therapist said, have you taken any of them? And the fact of the matter is, they'd already taken a lot of pills. And the therapist phoned 999, the emergency services, because the person was in the process of literally killing themselves. So it's something I think that a lot of therapists hope they'll never encounter. But when you do, as our conversation today can, being prepared, having some kind of plan and defensible decision making is absolutely essential.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought this topic, Rory. It's a heavy topic. We've spoken about it before. We'll no doubt speak about it again in the future, and it's a difficult topic to discuss. But I remember when I was training, there was a day where the rest of the class were all late. I was there, but everyone was coming in late, and eventually all my peers eventually arrived, and the road had been closed. The main motorway had been closed, and it had been closed because somebody had stood at the top of the bridge to end their life. And it just brought into focus that what we do in counselling can sometimes be a life and death exercise. It truly, truly can. We have people reaching out to us when they're at their deepest, darkest despair moments, and we have the privilege of accompanying them during that time and being there for them in that time. When a person is not heard, I think that not every person, I mean, there are people, as you said, Rory, that may take their life for reasons that we might go, okay, you know what, that is your choice, and it is every person's choice at the end of the day. But I think that those that feel worthless, unheard, unseen, we sit in a place of privilege. We could be that person that sees them, that hears them, that recognizes where they are, and wraps them in the unconditional love that we as therapists have. Shine that light into their life, put that hand into the darkness. It's at its spikiest end, life and death, what we do as counselors. And it's wonderful to make a podcast like this, to speak to passionate people who are out there making this difference. Wow. So this is taken from the notes that we use today anyway, are taken from a lecture in our Counsellor CPD library. It's Counsellor by Emma Chapman, but we do have a number of other resources on suicide. If you put in suicide as a keyword in the search in the Counselor CPD library, you'll see all the resources, including the discussion you had, Rory, that you quoted from Dr. I struggle with his name. Thank
Ian.
you. Yes. So if you remember, log in. If you're not a member of the CPD library, it costs literally less than a cup of coffee for 2 people per month. It really is. We try to make it low cost, high value. Go to counsellingtutor.com and you'll find that. But you'll also find the free handout with everything we've discussed today by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 338 and download this ultra important handout, Working with Suicidal Clients. We're back out of today's heavy, ethical, sustainable practice, and we go into Practice Matters, where, Rory, you've already beautifully introduced. You spoke with Ruth Hill about her lecture on REBT and pain management and exercise.
Yes, I mean, sometimes we think that therapy stands in isolation. People go to therapy and it is one task, if you like. But as Ruth Hill reminds us, you can use therapy and other forms of intervention to aid people. So I was very, very happy to catch up with Ruth. She talked about her lecture for this Counsellor CPD library using REBT, Rational Emotional Behavioural Therapy, on pain management and exercise. And this is what she told us.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counselor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you, and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
My guest today is the brilliant Ruth Hill. Ruth is joining me today to discuss some of the key ideas from her recent lecture for the Counselling CPD Library, titled REBT on Pain Management and Exercise. We'll explore how REBT can be applied to help clients manage pain and how exercise can play a central role in that process. So, Ruth, it's wonderful to have you back again.
Thank you very much. What an introduction.
Yeah, well, it's kind of all the truth as far as I can see. So, first of all, let's just explore REBT. Just for those people who may be listening and thinking, I don't know what REBT is, just give us a brief outline on what REBT is. A brief outline. Yeah.
Right. It's rational emotive behavioural therapy. And it's basically the precursor of CBT. So at the roots of CBT, we've got REBT. And the two split off and CBT became very well known and very popular. And there are no arguments between the two. It's I use CBT, we learn from each other. But CBT is often very short and focuses. One example I use is if somebody's scared of flying and it's because they were they had a scary flight. That's where you'd use your CBT to, how rational are your fears about flying? If someone's scared of flying because their parents kept leaving them at an airport when they were a child, that's more your REBT. We're looking into where did this stuff come from?
Oh, all right. So a little bit more exploratory of the past
Yes,
Yes.
we're digging into the roots a little
Yes.
bit. Yes.
Now, your lecture really focuses on applying cognitive, I'll use the term, but the overarching term, cognitive processes,
Yes.
where it comes to managing pain. So how might a client's belief about pain influence their emotional and behavioural responses to it?
Your beliefs, or sometimes we use assumptions because people have a belief that a belief can't be changed. So beliefs are assumptions. They're where we've taken an idea about something. So I don't want to feel pain, which is entirely understandable. But our brains can turn that into a really rigid demand. And it's just something that people do. It's how our brains work. So something reasonable becomes something very unreasonable. So if somebody has a pain and they have a belief, I can't bear this, then the pain will become more of a problem because they're fighting the belief that they cannot stand it. So if you can work on that belief and change it to, I really, really don't want to feel this pain, but I accept that I do and I can stand it. It feels like a small switch, but it's actually, it can have quite profound differences.
Yes, yeah. And I guess in that process, you're going to meet clients who have guarding or avoidance behaviours.
Mm-hmm.
And what might these guarding and avoidance behaviours be protecting them from?
It's from the fear of the pain or the pain, because the guarding is physiological, which is the pain, and psychological, which is the fear of the pain. So the guarding behavior is if someone's got a little bit of backache, they might think, oh, I need to lie down and rest because that will stop it hurting. And for 10 or 15 minutes, it might stop it hurting, but it will be triggering a cascade of other events, such as you're starting to decondition, you're reducing the amount of synovial fluid you're making, you're starting to see yourself as someone who has to lie down. So in guarding from the pain, in the same way that guarding from the fear in anxiety, it's not helpful.
It's a really interesting topic, isn't it? In my own life, many years ago, 1999, I attended a gym and I was talking to somebody who was a runner, who looked like an atypical runner, kind of very, very wiry, very tall. And I said, I wish I could run. And he said, well, why don't you? And I said, well, I've got asthma. And he said, well, I've got asthma. And I said, yeah, but I run out of breath. And he said, so do I. And it was one of the most uncomfortable conversations I've ever had in my life, because the excuses that I'd used for myself throughout the years just didn't land anymore. He said, well, yeah, so just like me, really.
Yeah.
And I said to him, will you train me? And I actually ran a half marathon in 1999. I did a Nottingham half marathon. Nearly, I have to say, I did thought I was literally going to die at the end of it. But I did actually get myself past the finishing post. And one of the he was there at the end of it to cheer me on. And one of the interesting things was that I reflected many years later when I went to train as a therapist, how my own negative thoughts had actually hampered me for years. Now, I know some people have pains where they may not be able to run, so I'm not saying that everybody should do this. But in my case, it was just a case of facing some very uncomfortable truths. I'd been telling myself a story for years, which actually wasn't actually true.
Yes, and I think you as a therapist, any therapist listening, will recognize that. You'll hear a client say something, oh, I always get this wrong, or I'm such a failure. And well, hang on a minute. That when you hear those words, it's like your wiry marathon runner. Well, hang on. Can we just... And that, I think that's what exploratory therapy is.
Yes.
Don't just accept at face value the client saying, I'm a complete failure, and go, oh, okay, then I'll put a tick in a box, complete failure, and we'll carry on. You stop and, well, hang on a minute. What does that mean? Where does that come from?
Yes. Yeah, and that really goes back, doesn't it, to when you say REBT looks at the source. You spoke at the top of the interview about, a child being left at the airport, and that's the key, isn't it? You're looking at the source of these thoughts. So we're talking about therapists kind of exploring. So how can a therapist support a client to sort of reframe distorted thoughts such as catastrophizing or mind reading or fortune telling about their pain experience?
A lot of the time, knowing the thing can make a change. So if you just have a client who has these thoughts and they just think that that's how people think, telling them that, well, actually, people make a lot of cognitive errors. This is a thing. So you've given them the information, this is a thing. And it's a mistake that people make. It's, if I was running and I had somebody observing me and they said, well, actually, you do a little stutter step every 4 steps, I wouldn't think, oh, I'm a terrible person. I think, thank goodness you've realized I'm doing something wrong. You've corrected me. My running will be better. And I think it can be like that for clients. You're not telling them you've made a terrible mistake. Something's horribly wrong here. This happens. We do this. We do black and white thinking. So be aware of it first. Know what it is. Then I think the next step is to start to observe it. You're not trying to make any massive changes here. You're just, well, what's actually happening? Because you can't say where you need to go if you're not 100% sure where you are now. So observation first, and then you can start to, right, give me an example, and then we can start to break them down again.
Yeah, so you need to get some, you and the client, or the client and the therapist need to get some starting position.
Yes.
Which is quite interesting because we are talking about exercise and starting positions, but some starting position to build on. And it's really interesting what you say about checking cognitive distortions. I was reading an article and it slipped my mind where I've read it, but it was someone who was saying to their therapist that their life wasn't really good, and as an example, they said, even my dishwasher doesn't clean my dishes properly. and the therapist said, well, why don't you just refill it with liquid and just hit the button again and rewash them? And on the face of it, it's like, oh, God, that's a real challenge, that. But actually, the person who was writing the article said it was a breakthrough. He'd realised that his thinking was incorrect. All he had to do really was open the dishwasher, look in, see the pots weren't clean, put some more liquid in and a tablet, press the button again, go and have a cup of tea, come back, and everything was great. And that opened the door for him. Yeah.
But if you're told as a child that you're wrong without any qualification or any explanation or any passion, then it's embedded. You're wrong. I'm wrong. My dishwasher, everything's wrong.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's teaching you can change your mind. I think that's a really important start, the process of change.
And I'm sure the listener will be thinking about this and thinking, I'm sure that's happened to me, where I have had a belief that I've carried for years and years and years, and all of a sudden you get contrary information. And in fact, Carl Rogers was very good at that. He basically said, he was quoted he wrote in the book The Way of Being. He said, experience for me is the highest authority. It's not the parables or Jung or Freud, excuse me. It's my experience I come back to again and again. You always find that in the quarterly things. But what he actually said after that, he said, my experience is infallible. Therefore, it needs to be checked in new and primary ways. And what he was saying basically is, you can delude yourself in some cases. You can believe something to be true and it's not.
Absolutely. Also, if people believe they're a certain type of person, so if I believe that I'm not an exerciser, then exercise would create dissonance. It would feel uncomfortable and wrong. And it's I did this for a friend who smoked. Oh, this is many years ago, before I'd done any training. It was just off the cuff. It was sort of, well, why don't you just become a non-smoker? And they took that in, and they got back in touch with me a few weeks later and said, I haven't had a cigarette. Yeah. I'm a non-smoker. Why would I smoke? So it's quite powerful to tell yourself, who are you? What are you like? What are you good at?
Yeah.
To really know that.
Yeah, I did the same with alcohol. I woke up one morning and said I don't drink alcohol anymore. And I never have, and that was 12 years ago. Never had any desire.
Because you're not a drinker, so it would be counterintuitive and just feel weird. Yeah,
and I do appreciate that some people with addictions may find that a bit kind of I don't know, a bit kind of smarmy, because, you know, people with addictions have physical responses. They may need other forms of support than just getting up and saying I'm not doing it. But for me, it was quite easy. And also, this is something that really interests me: tailoring the client's ability and motivate. What role could exercise, tailored to the client's ability and motivation, play in their physical and emotional recovery? So, what is the role of exercise?
Exercise, movement is medicine. That's the. We're designed to move. We're happiest when we're moving. But if somebody's experience is that they're not good at it, then they might think it's not for them. Which is like, well, breathing, not for me. It is for you. It's not a case of is it for me or not for me. It's find what you can do. Yeah. So if somebody has a lot of pain issues, a lot of physical issues, there will be something. I've started clients working with 5 minutes of thinking about movement, because taking somebody who's very deconditioned and telling them pick up weights, they're going to hurt themselves. So there's some work to be done in the beginning where you think about lifting the weight, because the nerve messages are exactly the same, and it will start to build the pathways to muscle. So it's somebody who's fit and strong and lifts a lot. That's not necessary. But somebody who is deconditioned, you need to start where they can start. So that's where the tailoring comes in. It's important to know what someone can do before you tell them what they need to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I think it's about, when people say exercise, some people immediately think they've got to run a half marathon or lift loads of weights, and exercise can be walking around the block. Exercise can be going for a swim. Mm-hmm. You know, it's how we look at exercise. And I think you're absolutely right. I have a 6-year-old granddaughter, and whenever we take her out, we take her into the park. As soon as her feet hit the park, she's off. She's running, she's dancing, she's using every part of her body, she's hanging off things. And it's such a natural, it seems such a very natural response. She just sees that as everyday part of her life. And I think that's really interesting that as a child, she's doing things that maybe a lot of adults kind of fall out of as they get older.
Yep. And that's where the belief starts that, well, it's not for me.
Yeah.
Because something, and I do think, okay, sometimes people are from families where it isn't important. And I think some of the damage is done in schools where exercise can be used as a punishment.
Yep, absolutely.
And that can have repercussions years later.
Yeah.
So it's, and I think therapists will understand it. It's not saying, well, you should have done it or you need to do it. it's understanding why you can't at the moment and working through that and supporting.
Yeah. My wife has PTS every time she smells chlorine, because as a child, her sadistic gym teacher, Mrs. McGarver, for anybody listening, would sue me if you dare. Would literally throw anybody who was a bit nervous into the pool, whether they could swim or not.
Yeah, and the repercussions still happening today.
Yes.
I do have clients who talk of loving, helpful, thoughtful parents and the teacher. So that seems to be overrepresented in physical education.
Yeah, and I'm sure modern teachers and one would hope that it was more of a collaborative, but it was like, in my day in the 70s, it was literally like joining the army. It was like that. PT was literally, and most of the people who taught PT were ex-military, so it's hardly surprising that a lot of people didn't really take up sport. A lot of people now in my age group probably shied away from exercise because of that experience. So REBT principles, if we're thinking of supporting clients, how can we integrate the use of REBT or cognitive processes to support clients to approach exercise maybe with a different mindset? What kind of techniques can be used?
I think that's the thing of finding out where you are first. So first of all, what's the barrier? What's the blockage here? What are your beliefs about exercise? What does the word mean to you? To me, growing up in England, it means basically being hit with a hockey stick.
Yeah.
To my husband, growing up in New Zealand, it means playing on playing on the cricket, rugby teams and having a whale of a time. What does it mean? What's exercise? And just doing the investigative work and finding out what are the beliefs underlying this, because they can be changed. So if someone like me exercise, it just means basically running around a freezing cold pitch and coming home covered in bruises. I'm not doing that.
No.
Okay. Right. So it's finding the gap between the thing that happened and the thing you want to do, and where are you now? And can we move you closer to the thing you want to do? And REBT will ask you, what are your beliefs about it? What does it trigger when you hear this word? And what would you like it to trigger? What do you want exercise to mean? Yeah,
absolutely. And I think for the listener listening, that might resonate, because the word exercise can be absolutely loaded with cognitive misconceptions, can't it?
Yes.
My form of exercise nowadays is I just walk around. I have a little app on my phone and I just walk around and I just keep walking around until I get ping and I've done so many steps. So that kind of suits me. And occasionally I'll go for a swim, and that type of thing. That kind of works for my wife, who's got a number of medical conditions. That works for her. Walking is really, really useful, but it's doing something. So finally, what do you hope that anybody watching this lecture that you've delivered for the Counsellor CPD Library, what do you hope they'll take away from it and be able to build into their practices?
I think REBT is useful as a framework. So if you get a bit lost somewhere, REBT is very well structured to just keep you moving on, keep things going. I think it's just another tool in the box. The therapists watching this will have their own methodologies. They'll know how they work best with clients. So it's just oh, hang on a minute, maybe I could start to go down this path. But I think it's just useful as another tool in the belt.
REBT on pain management and exercise is available in the CPD library now for you to view. And it just leaves me to say, Ruth Hill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Massive thank you to Ruth for that discussion. Thank you to you, Rory, for holding the all-important discussions. That is today's Practice Matters. And we now move straight into Student Services. Student Services is sponsored by Counselling Skills Academy. Can't tell you how many times Rory and I have heard counselling students say that learning skills and knowing that they're using them effectively is really, really challenging. The reason for this is because we don't get to see another counsellor using skills in a real live session. In reality, this means that we're asked to learn something that we can never see demonstrated in a real setting, and it's no wonder that many of us are left feeling unsure. If you want to see counselling skills used in real sessions by qualified therapists, so this is real sessions, real presentations, and real use of skills, then go to counselingskillsacademy.com. There's some free videos on skills, including a full live session that you can have a look at. Gain the competence and the confidence of knowing you're using your counselling skills effectively. Just visit counselingskillsacademy.com. And today in Student Services, speaking about receiving and using counselling skills feedback. I love this topic. I really do. So we do our counselling skills. We are doing our simulated skills, maybe in a triad, maybe in a pair. Maybe we've got a tutor kind of looking over that. How do we give feedback? How do we receive the feedback? How do we implement that feedback? You know, if you're feeding back to a peer on their skills, you don't want to criticize them, but you might see something that will help or guide them. And how can we put it in a way that is useful, or how can we receive it in a way that is useful, so we don't go, oh man, I didn't do that properly, I need to do it this way. It's a topic that comes up a lot. It's been discussed in our Facebook group. Go to Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, come and join the discussion. What's your thoughts, Rory?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting, and I thought it was just ran through my mind, as it's apt to do, that you wouldn't ask someone who's learning to drive to give feedback to someone who is learning to drive, because they're still learning. And I think that's the key thing. When you may be in a little triad. So, usually there's an observer, and then there's a person who plays the role of the client, which they usually call the helpee, and then there's someone who plays the role of the counsellor. They usually call that the helper. And I think that if you are going to do feedback, the best way to do that is after the session, the person who was the client, shall we say, for the course of this discussion, feeds back first, because their experience, it's their session, so their experience is probably a bit more authoritative than the observer, because it's all about the person being listened to. And then the observer can give feedback. And I think when we're giving feedback, we should look at the kind of skills being used. So I think a tutor would almost certainly say to their students, we're going to look at the use of reflecting and paraphrasing, or we're going to use the skill of questioning, or we're going to use this particular skill. So first of all, be very clear on the skill you're being asked to observe, and stick with that skill. And I think also realize that even professionals who use counselling skills don't always get it right. We're human beings, and we're apt to, cognitive biases and misinterpretations and misattunement. So I think when you're giving your feedback, just be kind of curious and say things like, I wonder what had happened if you'd have just extended that silence a little longer, or I wonder what have happened if you'd have reflected this part of the person's story back instead of that one. Try to be quite analytical with it, as opposed to saying, well, you didn't reflect that back very well, and you could have done this, because it'll be your turn at some point to have your skills fed back to, and you would hope that the person is as thoughtful to you as you are to the person you gave feedback to. So I think that's my starting position, Ken.
I think it's a very good starting position, Rory. Very informed from many years of tutoring and watching feedback. So feedback can, for some, be difficult to take and to receive. And for some, it can be difficult to give. I don't want to hurt that person's feelings. So a great strategy for feedback, if you do spot an area where that person might improve, is, as you said, Rory, to plan how you structure that around how they can improve, not where it fell short. If you reflected back the feelings the client was expressing rather than just what they said, that might have been a bit more effective. So you're giving a constructive piece of feedback, and always sandwich the feedback between two really positive statements. So I really loved how you were present. Your active listening was incredible. Then you put in the little bit of constructive feedback, and then you immediately go into, but what I really enjoyed was the way you ended that session and how you did a little summary at the end and really tied up all the loose ends. There, you've got a little package that you hand to somebody that feels balanced, and it has information in it that is useful to that person. So this section of the podcast is actually sponsored by the Counselling Skills Academy, which focuses on this very, very topic. And here's an exercise I'm going to share from Counselling Skills Academy. Take your skills that you learn. So you've got silence, reflection, I can't say them. Paraphrase. Open question. Thank you, Rory. Open question. Write the skills down, on a document. And then put a little description of what the skill is. Just 2 lines of what the skill is. And then ask yourself the following questions. What does this skill do for the counsellor, and what does this skill do for the client? Write what you feel that the skill does for the counsellor. So why do we paraphrase something? What does that do for the client? Well, they hear their story back from another person's point of view, and they may see it with new eyes, or it may make them feel that person has understood me and listened to me. Why is paraphrasing important to the counsellor? Well, it's important to the counsellor because we might paraphrase something back and the client may go, no, it's not really like that. It's like this. So we can make sure that we're in the right frame of reference. So write what the skill is, what the skill does for the client, what the skill does for the counsellor, and have that as a key. You'll use it throughout your studies. And you can use it as a key when you're observing somebody else's skills. You can say, they've used the skill of silence. Then you look, silence, what is it? What's the definition? What does it do for the client? What does it do for the counsellor? And it gives you more of a scope for feeding back because you got the skill, its definition and how it is used and what it does right there. And you can ask yourself, did it do what it was supposed to do? Did that skill, was that skill effective in that context? And it just gives you more information, I think, to feed back if you kind of have the theory, as it were, of the skills on hand. Because here's the truth. One counsellor may use silence, another one may use an open question, another one may use a reflection, another one may use a paraphrase, all for the same presentation. And guess what? Every single one of them might be right and effective. And every single one of them might be wrong or ineffective in the way the skill was used or the place it was used in. So it's not so much a case of I wouldn't have used that skill there, I would have used this one. It's, was the skill effective? And if it was, why was it effective? And if it wasn't effective, why was it not effective? And what skill might have been more effective? So this is a great technique for giving feedback. But I tell you what, it's a cracking technique for your own skills. If you are able to record them or look back on them and you say, I used silence there. Was that effective? Did it do what it needed to do? Did it give space for the client to think and come back Did they come back in and actually go a little bit deeper into that context? Did it feel inappropriate? Did it feel uncomfortable? Did it feel like the client was going, oh, I don't know what to say here. I've got this silence. Was it effective? What would have I used? If I could go back and have that same presentation, would I have used that same skill or something different? And that's a great place to start with feedback.
Yeah. And I'm also a great advocate of recording skills, because Rogers himself pioneered this in the 1950s. He spent eye-watering amounts of money on big reel-to-reel tape recorders, and there's lots of testimony of Rogers students huddling around these recorders, listening very carefully to the interaction and how it changed how the client responded. And I think there's great value in that. Because, you can have someone who's absolutely brilliant at using counselling skills. I remember many years ago observing a masterclass in counselling skills. And I said to her at the end, I said, how did you feel about the interaction? She said, I didn't feel anything at all. And I said, well, that's the area you need to work on. I said, you've managed to master the chords of the instrument. But what you need to do is you need to put the passion and for that to be transmitted. It's like playing, I don't know, a riff on a guitar, very technically very good, but there's no soul to it, there's no passion to it. So I'm a great believer in recording and all huddling around the recording and trying to make sense of it and saying, this is interesting and that's interesting. And I think it's a less combative way of assessing skills, because everybody's learning. If you have a triad and you've got, the observer, you've got the person who's playing the role of counsellor and the person who's playing the role of helper, you can all get involved and play it back and say, because there's always something you miss. That's the thing, our memories are very, very kind of fallible, really. But the recordings aren't. The recordings record the actuality of it. So certainly I think when you get into diploma and above, recordings are, and indeed at kind of certificate level, recordings are always useful because you could use it to either transcribe or to observe. But my final observation on counselling skills is not to be too hard on yourself. I could tell you as a qualified therapist of many years, I made some howlers in my use of skills because I'm human. I make mistakes. I've shared one or two of my faux pas through the years, and sometimes we fall out of attunement for whatever reason, and I think it's to be about honest of ourselves and say that sometimes we're not going to get it right 100% of the time. I think that takes the pressure off, because a lot of students believe they have to get it right all the time.
Yeah,
and I think it's a great aspiration. But I think the reality of it is that it puts a massive unrealistic expectation on your shoulders, which actually probably makes you withdraw from using skills because you find they're getting it wrong.
Yeah, very much so. Kind to self. I was in practice for a good number of years, and you're always learning. Let me put it that way. Always learning, reflecting back on a session, going, "Wow, that I could have used something different there." So, my final thoughts on this is: look to your course provider, look to your learning provider, and see if they have observation sheet templates. Well, we certainly use them. When you were training counselors, Rory, there was an observation sheet where you were given some areas or elements that you could kind of focus on. And I know that CPCAB, who are a training operator, they're the largest in the UK of training counsellors and psychotherapists. They have peer observation sheets, and it kind of gives you a framework to work within. It goes through the contracting area, working with an ethical framework, limits of availability, confidentiality, all the bookends. And it may be that you're not practicing bookends in that session. That's okay. It's also got whether a person used certain skills and how effective those were. And it just takes you through a guided process of what to be observing if you're going to be giving some feedback, and it gives you some boxes that you can write in to kind of pass that information over. So ask your learning provider. If you're told break out in skills sessions and then give feedback, say, is there a form or a paper that we can use for that feedback, or a framework we can use for it? And if there isn't one, go look online. Skills feedback observation form or something like that, and go and find one that works for you and that your peers are happy to work with you. There it is. Any final thoughts on feedback in skills, Rory?
Well, I mean, I think just practice. I did read somewhere that you have to practice a skill 1,000 times before you gain competence. I don't know how true that is, but it sounds like it's got some basis in truth. And practice. They say practice makes perfect. Don't be put off by feedback that says this, you could do better here, you could do better there. Look at the feedback. And I think my final view is that you don't have to take all feedback. Some might give you feedback and it might not actually be accurate. So look for a continuity of feedback. If you've got 3 sessions where someone's different is telling you the same thing, then that's probably going to be right. So don't be too hard on yourself. Keep going and carry with you that every student, including the 2 students that were in the past delivering this podcast, went through the same arc of learning. And to some extent, when we're in practice, still did. So there's no total mastery of anything. It's a commitment to keeping those skills honed. So don't be too hard on yourself. That's what I'd say.
Yeah, there's something we've covered a number of times. I know. Put it in here at the end of this topic. If you're a student right now and you have these skill sessions, you're breaking out and you're going, I've got to put in a bit of silence and a bit of paraphrasing, and I've got to put in an open question and a clarifier, and you're going through and it feels hard, and you've got to think of everything. When the person's speaking, you're thinking, what skill am I going to use here? What's going to be the right skill for this place? Well, here's the truth of it. That will eventually go away, and it will just become unconscious competence. It really will. It's like driving a car. When you first got in the car, you go, I've got to push in the clutch now, and I've got to change the gear. Or if you're even in an automatic, now I've got to indicate first, and I've got to check the side mirror and the back mirror and look over my shoulder before I change lanes. There's all these mental processes that are playing out. And I bet if you're a driver and you drive regularly now, you get in your car, get out at the other side, and you don't really even remember the drive because you're unconsciously competent within the drive. And the same is true with skills. There will come a time, and this is my promise, that there will come a time in where the skills just disappear, and it's just a session, and it's you and them, and they just come out naturally. But they come out naturally because of the practice that you said there, Rory. And in practice, we need feedback. So it's part of the process. Don't take it to heart. Take it as learning. Don't take everything that everyone says as the truth. Measure it against what you feel as well. And and if you can, just enjoy the process. Enjoy the process, because you don't get feedback from your skills from your clients. They won't say, hey, I could have done with a spot more silence there and a bit more reflection. So it's that golden opportunity to get others feeding back on how it was for them. What a great podcast. We're so grateful that you join us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast. This has been episode 338.
Yes, we started off with ethical, sustainable practice, where we touched on a sensitive topic, that of working with suicidal clients. And just as a reminder, there is a handout for this. Go to counsellingtutor.com, navigate to the podcast tab, it's on the top. Click it, find episode 338, and that handout is waiting for you. We moved on to Practice Matters, and I spoke with Ruth Hill, who mixes REBT and cognitive strategies with helping people manage pain and exercise. There is a lecture in the CPD library, but the interview itself was very revealing, how we can blend therapy and other forms of helping in the service of our clients. And then finally, in student services, we meandered along and talked about receiving and using counselling skills feedback. We touched on a number of topics, and I think we finished really on saying not to be too hard on yourself. And finally, we'd just love to thank you for your support. We love your subscriptions, your shares, your likes. They really do mean the world to us. So until next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.